Good morning, everybody. Welcome to all of you. I'm so pleased that our stalwarts are here coming in and out in the rain this gray morning, but welcome to all of you, and thanks for being here. And welcome to everyone who's streaming live today. This is a long-awaited day for me to invite Nora Gallagher here with us. She works at Patagonia as the environmental strategist. And I'll introduce her more fully, but let us pray to open our morning. The Lord be with you. Oh God, we give you thanks for our church and for your spirit among us that moves and breathes and guides us and makes us fully alive in all ways that we're open to you. And ask that you would bless this morning and bless Nora and Vincent Stanley with her as they travel. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So Nora, I met Nora, I think in 2007 or so, when I was at St. Bartholomew's Church in Midtown. And she came to do a talk, a writing workshop, and she had just come out with one of her many books. And apart from working at Patagonia, I knew her first as a spiritual memoirist and an active Episcopalian and a seeker and a thinker and someone who manages to give real words and real thoughts and tangible conceptions to abstract spiritual concepts. And she's someone that I look to as a mentor and a role model in that department. And I laid out some of the books that I have from my shelf that she's written. And she's written the beautiful novel, Changing Light, that was an editor's choice at the New York Times Book Review. And she's written about illness in a very compelling and moving way, Moonlight Sonata at the Mayo Clinic. And she's written a lot of spiritual memoir that is so worth reading that I want to just give each one of you copies of her books. I've quoted them widely, so I hope in a way you won't read them because you'll see where I get all my material. But anyway, she's a tremendous force and voice in our church. But she's here today in her capacity as the environmental strategist at Patagonia and to talk to us about being fully alive through work and through her life and work. One other book she's edited for Patagonia is Tools for Grassroots Activists, which she edited together with Lisa Myers, who's here, Kathy and Bill Pike's daughter. And Lisa, I forget your title, you're Director of Environmental something. Activism. The boss. The boss. And I also want to welcome Vincent Stanley, who's here, Nora's husband, and he's been with Patagonia since the beginning of the company, and he's the Director of Philosophy, I think, at Patagonia. And they both travel the world teaching business students. And Nora leads also a student group at Yale made up of students from the forestry school, the divinity school, and the business school on meaningful work in a time of ecological crisis. So welcome, Nora. I could go on, but I won't. And I think you'll take questions afterwards. So welcome to our church.
I'm going to hope that I speak loud enough for all of you. I have a little frog in my throat from the wonderful East Coast weather. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you, Peter, for welcoming me here. Thank all of you for showing up on this rainy day. I'd like to begin with a story. In the spring of 1988, Patagonia opened a store in Boston on Newbury Street. And within days, the people who worked in the store called in sick, almost all of them, mainly with bad headaches. We closed the store. And we hired an environmental engineer who came in and said basically what we thought, that there was something wrong with the ventilation system. She said, it's just recycling the same old tired air. And she said, I can fix that, not a problem. We said, but what was in the air? And she said, oh, probably formaldehyde. We said, formaldehyde? And she said, yes, from the cotton clothes in the basement. They off-gas formaldehyde. Well, that led us to commission a study of conventional cotton. And this discovery that cotton grown with pesticides is one of the most destructive crops in the agricultural world. You know, as Saul fell from his horse and became Paul, the scales were lifted from our eyes. And I think of the Boston store as Patagonia's conversion story. I don't think it's any secret to any of us that the environmental world is in trouble. Environmental bankruptcy, like corporate bankruptcy, happens very slowly and then all of a sudden. And we're running short on fresh water, topsoil, fish, wetlands, and nature simply cannot adapt to the speed of global warming. A recent UN report from about 15,000 scientific sources says that 1 million animal and plant species are in danger of disappearing into the dark of extinction, largely because of climate change and also because of our reckless use of land and resources. I'm not going to bury you in horrible facts, but I want to give you just one that broke my heart this year, which is that since 1970, the number of birds in North America has dropped by 29%. Since 1970, we've lost 2.9 billion birds. And we are the people whose God cares about every sparrow that falls to the ground. Well, I come to this situation as an editor and environmental strategist at Patagonia, and as a Christian who has learned something about the vulnerability at the heart of the Gospels. And as a citizen of a place, Santa Barbara, California, that was almost wiped off the map by a great fire and a terrible mudslide, made much worse by climate change. And I look to the natural world for hope and solace and continuity. And after a week in the high mountains, my thoughts and memories feel as if they assume their proper weight. It's as if they'd been whirled in a centrifuge and sorted out. The author Rick Bass says that when he was up in the far north of British Columbia in land sacred to the First Nations people, he saw a wolf beside a lake, and he said, "I felt as if I had been given a second chance." The grace and the beauty and the liveness of the world is intertwined with my sense of God. Sally McFaig, who graduated from Yale Divinity School, where I teach, said that she came up with a beautiful metaphor for this. She says, "The world is God's body." Now, she doesn't mean this literally any more than when we say God's kingdom, we mean it literally. But she means it as a metaphor, and I think it's a striking metaphor for our times. Imagine that this world, in which Jesus found a home and lived among us, in which we live and move and have our being, is the living body of God. Sally McFaig paraphrased Uranus when she wrote, "The glory of God is every creature fully alive." I very much appreciated the forum talk last week from Matthew Crossman about keeping the natural world and letting it do its work on us. a member of your parish who is related to my boss, Kathy Pike, wrote a poem about the beauty of the world recently, and with permission, I share a few lines with you. Walk. Feel the sky. Feel the autumn leaves crunch between shoe and pavement. Feel the soft blows of morning's winds. Walk forward. Listen to nature talk. She speaks every language, from bird to tree to stream. Patriarch Bartholomew of the Eastern Orthodox Church says, for human beings to destroy the biological diversity of God's creation, for human beings to degrade the integrity of the earth by causing changes in its climate, by stripping the earth of its natural forests and destroying its wetlands, for human beings to contaminate the earth's water, its land, its air, and its life. These are sins. To commit a crime against the natural world is a sin against ourselves and a sin against God. When I first read this, I had and I have a very hard time with the word sin, as it carries so much baggage, misunderstanding, and guilt. Yet it very well may be the job of those of us who live in the intersection between environmentalism and religion in a time of environmental crisis to stand up and face our sin, atone for it, and act. How do we move beyond our fear of sin and our guilt over the damage we've done into the work of renewal, into the gift of God's grace, into a second chance? Well, where we work and what we do at work plays a great part in either mitigating or adding to the ecological crisis, helping or hurting or both. The textile and fashion industry, of which Patagonia is a part, is particularly dirty. Ranking, depends on the survey, but ranking probably number 3 on the worst emissions scale. Pope Francis, in his encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si', says that work is a necessity. It's part of the meaning of life on earth. He says it's a source of rich personal growth, a way to have creativity, to plan for the future, develop our talents, live out our values, relate to others, give glory to God. Work, for Francis, is not something separate from our religious or our personal life, but an integral part of both. How do we bridge the gap between our religious lives, our environmental values, and our work? I think of a friend's mother who works for an electric company, and she says that she's glad to be able to do good for the people she manages, but she struggles to affect the environmental footprint of the company she works for. At Patagonia, things changed after the employees at the Boston store got sick, and after we commissioned the study of conventional cotton. As I said, the Boston story is Patagonia's conversion story, and I suspect that to become fully alive, you need more than one conversion. After the study, we faced the situation and we acted. Knowing what we knew, we could not continue to use conventional cotton for our sportswear. We went organic in 1996. From cotton, we moved to what happens in Patagonia's name in every step of the supply chain. The supply chain is what textile and other manufacturers use to describe everything from the crops grown to make yarn and the sewing of the fabric into garments, to shipping finished clothes, to warehouses, stores, and your front porch. We worked with an outside auditor and an in-house corporate responsibility specialist to establish the working conditions and pay for every person who sews a Patagonia garment. We work with Fair Trade Certified to establish not only fair wages and working conditions for the people who sew our clothes, but we also pay a bonus to the workers at the end of each year. The bonus goes to the workers, not to the owners of the factories. And they are invited to use the bonus in any way they choose. So far, they've paid their children's school fees out of the bonus. They've opened free daycare centers, and they've bought bicycles. More than half of our clothes are now certified by Fair Trade. We learned how to make fleece jackets from recycled plastic bottles, and then we learned how to make fleece jackets from fleece jackets. By 2025, all of our clothing will be made from recycled or reclaimed material. Nothing will come from a virgin source. We examined our use of paper and the catalogs, the sources of our electricity, and the amount of oil we consumed when driving to work. We continued to support our employees with medical insurance, paternity and maternity leave, subsidized on-site childcare, and paid internships with nonprofit environmental groups. As we have for many years, we gave 1% of sales to grassroots activists, and that figure is now at over $100 million. Patagonia's goal is to be carbon neutral across our entire business, including our supply chain. That means every factory by 2025. It's a very short time to go. This supply chain, by the way, accounts for 97% of our carbon emissions. So this means that we will eliminate, capture, or otherwise mitigate all of the carbon emissions we create, including those from the factories that make our clothes. So none of this was or is easy. I was talking to our founder, Yvon Chouinard, about this whole process, and he said, you know, living the examined life is a big pain in the ass. And like other things in human life, it all began with one step that led to another. Once you start down this road, you can't stop. And this journey has brought us to a place where Patagonia employees are fully alive at work. I have never seen such creativity at work, and I've been there for over 35 years. Having a purpose and living out their values at work energizes people. And something else, something that I would not have guessed, the very restraints imposed on the company by working to meet the climate goals has increased innovation by 100%. Here's a story. The director of our sportswear line took a look at cashmere. Cashmere, that beautiful, warm yarn, comes from goats, most of them in Mongolia. And for many years, While cashmere was a luxury yarn, the herds of goats were well managed, the grasslands were intact. But the boom in the yarn has caused many herdsmen to increase their flocks, causing overgrazing and even desertification in parts of Mongolia. So Helena decided to act. First, she stopped making cashmere sweaters, which put a big dent in our sportswear line. Second, she started looking into her options, and she found a small company in Prato, Italy, outside Florence, that was making reclaimed wool fabric. Bernardo Calamai's family first started producing reclaimed wool at the end of the 19th century in 1878. They were two brothers, one was 15 and the other 18, and they selected used garments and shredded and cut them into reclaimed fibers, and then they learned how to spin them into new yarn. And they had continued this work for over 100 years. Helena heard about them. She made a trip to Italy, and she asked them what they could do with cashmere sweaters. And they said they would work on it. And now Patagonia makes reclaimed, we make new cashmere sweaters out of old cashmere sweaters, what we call our reclaimed cashmere sweater. We started worn wear, selling gently used clothes on the web and in a new pop-up store in Colorado, and we repair clothes at several stores, at our Reno distribution center, and out of a truck that travels the country. Should you meet her, the truck's name is Delia. Pope Francis says in Laudato Si, reusing something instead of immediately discarding it, when done for the right reasons, can be an act of love, which expresses our dignity. I started working at Patagonia as a catalog editor part-time. My goal was to have a decent paying job, a day job, to support my writing. I had no idea that my day job would become so interesting and the source of so much joy. I've watched the company examine itself, learn to live more and more responsibly within its limits and means. It's been like opening a door and seeing another door and then another door. It has taught me the nature of work, that it really is about creativity, planning for the future, developing our talents, living out our values, relating to others. My place of work is becoming something like what we religious people call the beloved community. And all because we had employees with headaches at a store on Newberry Street. I'm now part of a group at the company who've been with the company for a long time, and we're at or near what is traditionally called retirement age. And the head of our human resources department came to me and other people in my age group and said, you know, at Patagonia we have all these programs. We have subsidized on-site childcare, we have training programs for mid-level managers, but too often as people get older, we simply invite them to jump off a cliff. We discard older people. So together, we're creating a program for people to be an elder council, to teach and mentor younger employees, to prevent a brain drain, and for those of us who've been there so long to see the value and the legacy of our work. When I work with this group, I feel as if we are durable, gently used jackets with some life left in us and more adventures to enjoy. We're part of the Warnware program. Now, I don't want you to walk away from here with this ad for Patagonia, or to believe that this is a virtuous company and everyone else should just quit your job and come work with us. Patagonia is one company among many walking this path. This is a worldwide movement. And I'm convinced that it's the future. Recently, 181 CEOs from the Business Roundtable, representing a number of publicly held companies, which includes Apple, JP Morgan Chase, Pepsi, issued a new statement on the purpose of a corporation. I don't think they've done this for 20 years. Rather than the old purpose, that a corporation is responsible only to its shareholders, the Roundtable expanded who is a stakeholder, and they started including employees, the environment, their supply chain, and their local communities. When companies of this size make this kind of statement, you know a movement is happening. This summer in Italy, we visited Barilla, the largest pasta maker in the world. And they were working on becoming a benefit corporation. Benefit corporations are certified by B-Lab after a rigorous evaluation of their treatment of the environment, their employees, and their supply chain. And B-Lab was started by three very interesting, very young men who left their careers in private equity and business with the goal of making business a force for good. Benefit corporations write into their articles of incorporation environmental and social justice principles, and these are protected even if the business is sold. Danone, a French company, makers of what we in the US call Danone yogurt, 2.5 billion euros in annual sales, publicly held, decided to convert its US subsidiary White Wave to a benefit corporation. They set out to do it in 3 years. They did it in 1 year. The reason? The employees worked so hard because they believed in the mission. They were fully alive. Emmanuel Faber, the CEO of Danone, said he decided to do this because he read the ad Patagonia put in the New York Times on Black Friday in 2011 called "Don't Buy This Jacket." And in the ad, we talked about the carbon footprint of one of our jackets and urged people to consider every purchase you make. Faber told us the ad convinced him that he could appeal to his customers' values as much as to their instincts. And then he told us that when he took his US subsidiary to B Corp status, a consortium of 12 banks that he works with negotiated a lower interest rate for his loans. Why? Because in their experience, benefit corporations are less of a risk because of their high standards of governance. For 10 years, Eileen Fisher has been collecting and taking back used Fisher clothing, reselling them in what they call their Renew program. They've saved 1.2 million pieces from landfill. Reformation, super cool women's clothing line out of Los Angeles, starts with a set of standards and a grading system for the materials they use for their clothing before they even design a dress. And they've been carbon neutral since 2015. There are tons of other examples. In December, 2 years ago, a fire started in Santa Paula, California, a small town near Ventura, where Patagonia keeps its headquarters. The fire spread very quickly until 7 cities were evacuated. Ventura was one of them. Our headquarters was shut down. 75% of our employees were either affected or evacuated. It took over 8,000 fire workers to stop the fire. Finally, at Christmas, we went home. And in early January, a tropical storm hit the mountainsides that had been burned above Santa Barbara on soil that was really more like melted glass. And this caused a mudslide that buried everything between the mountains and the sea. The body of a man was found on the beach, and near him was the body of a bear. We think of climate change as a future event, but having witnessed this fire and the mudslide, I'm here to tell you it won't happen next year or in 2040 or in some other time or some other place. It will happen right where you live, and it could happen tomorrow. The climate and ecological crisis are not some future event. They are here, a reality, and I know that I need to live as if that were really true. The surprising thing to me, when I live as if the environmental crisis were real at work, I feel the opposite of despair. I feel it is true. I feel energy and hope. It's true that we're destructive as human beings. We've put at risk the beauty and diversity of the world, and we've endangered our own lives and the lives of all the other creatures on the planet. Yet, we are the same people who created, for example, the Endangered Species Act and rescued so many species from the edge of extinction. We are the same people who work to save rivers and forests and wetlands, who created conservation easements. We created benefit corporations, solar panels, electric cars. We may be destructive, but we are also creative, compassionate, and generous. When the fire in California was burning, many of our employees were evacuated, and Lisa and I were trying to connect all of the members of the environmental team, and several of the younger members didn't respond, and we started to get quite worried. And it turned out they had organized themselves into a clothing brigade to bring Patagonia clothes to the firefighters who were camped out beside our Ventura store. And employees in the store started watching out for people who'd lost their houses, and without intruding on their privacy, made it clear that anything they needed or wanted was theirs, free of charge. After the mudslide, many people walked out of the mud to a building at the bottom of the slide near the beach. It was All Saints Episcopal Church. At 5 a.m., the rector, Amy Delavitt, walked over from her house and found that the emergency workers had set up in the parish hall, and there were lines of muddy people everywhere. So she asked the EMTs if they could to move their operations into the church. So she and her parishioners, who had turned up to help, could feed the waiting people. And she told me that one of the enduring images of that day is of a woman covered in mud being worked on by medical workers right next to the baptismal font. And she said later that among the things she learned from this crisis was to keep her pantry full and give the fire captain the keys to her church. In this time of ecological crisis, may I suggest that each one of us take a long look at our own vocations, our own work, and ask ourselves, what step can I take? What steps have already been taken at my place of work that I can build on? In my sector or category of work, what are others doing that I can join with or emulate? What opportunity awaits us as a follower of the God who offers us a second chance and cares for every sparrow that falls to the ground? Pope Francis writes in Laudato Si, "Yet all is not lost. Human beings, while capable of the worst, are also capable of rising above themselves, choosing again what is good, and making a new start. We are able to take an honest look at ourselves, to acknowledge our deep dissatisfaction, and to embark on new paths to authentic freedom. No system can completely suppress our openness to what is good, true, and beautiful, or our God-giving ability to respond to His grace at work deep in our hearts. I appeal to everyone throughout the world not to forget this dignity which is ours. No one has the right to take it away from us." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nora. And I think we have time for a few questions. So Jill or Peter, could I ask you to pass this around, and I'm going to help transmit the questions. Or thanks. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for being here. I went to a football game yesterday at what is supposedly an institution of higher learning, Yale University, and a protest broke out. I think maybe you've read about it in the middle of the game. And I have to say, as I watched, there started with 50 in the middle of the field, and then fellow students started streaming solemnly down onto the field to join them in their space. And I had to wonder, as Yale students reject or walk further away from traditional ideas of God and faith and religion, has climate change replaced that as their religion? And I have to say one addendum to this. As we walked out in the darkness, it was double overtime game. It went forever. And I was with a young man. We were walking out of the stadium in the darkness, and it was strewn with trash. I didn't see one Yale student who participated in the protest out there cleaning up. I think they were waiting for the workers to do that job. So it raises, for me, some questions about religion and climate change, and are the two, one replacing the other?
I have to ask, were you on the Harvard side or were you on the...
I was, unfortunately, with a young man who was an 8th grader near the Yale students, and after the protest, they continued on, and what they were doing next was disrobing. I have video of all this stuff. I didn't know what I was getting, but they then started to take their clothes off. So that sort of completed the protest, I guess.
I think he's saying he's on the Harvard side.
I saw that, and I thought about what the reaction would be to it. But your question about whether climate change has replaced religion, I think sometimes the answer is yes, or some form of collective faith. There was a very interesting piece, I don't know if you saw it in the New York Times a couple of days ago, just very recently, maybe Wednesday, by a woman who she's a op-ed contributor, and she was writing about sort of just this problem, which is that many people, not only young people, but many people have put their, what is usually a religious or spiritual faith into politics, and she was worried about that. And it's a very well-written piece. I urge you to read it. I have the same concerns. At the same time, I see these young activists all the time. At Patagonia, we see them and talk to them, and it's like they're desperate. I mean, I know that kind of action is sort of, I don't know, sometimes it's ineffective to my point of view, but I know that they're desperate. I know that they're young, and they believe, as I believed when I was young, that we were going to blow ourselves up with nuclear bombs. And I remember how afraid I was. I think they are deeply afraid, and they're trying to find a way to wake us all up. I hope that we all find ways to talk to each other more than just to witness protests. But I do have very sympathy for their deep fear. And I hope that the churches, in many ways, can sort of help, I think, with this situation in the same way that the churches really united behind the civil rights movement. That we can be a kind of place where people can come for solace from the fear, but also we need to see who they are, what they care about, why it's so important. Don't know if that answers your question. Yes.
Yeah, 2 points. As a professional earth scientist, I've been very involved and interested in climate change, but it blew me away to learn the impact of the textile industry on the environment. And this was fairly recent, that after the petroleum industry, the textile industry has the second largest impact on Mother Earth. For a pair of blue jeans and a t-shirt, it's something like 4,000 gallons of water and 1/3 of a pound of pesticide just to grow the cotton. Forget
Thank you.
about the tractors.
You can join me the next time.
Yeah, but the question I have for you on this is, most Americans have no idea that textiles can be recycled, and something like 90% of the textiles end up in the landfill.
Right.
How do we educate the public at large that, yes, you can put your clothes in the bin where they go to a church or something, but you can also put your clothes in a bin where the clothes are ground up, recycled, and new yarn is made.
Yes.
And I think here in New Canaan, we have a group called Planet New Canaan is working very hard to educate New Canaan that, yes, you can recycle, more than just plastic bags. Now it's textiles.
Yes.
But I'd like to hear what Patagonia is doing to try to educate the public at large that this can be done. The second point is all these, and there was a great op-ed written by Senators Schumer and Whitehouse last week in the Boston Globe. The companies you mentioned are members of groups that say we want to be ecologically mindful. However, these companies support the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
Oh, yes, I saw that.
The largest negative impact on the environment is the lobbying of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It is the most massive lobby organization that's promoting the EPA's backing off all these environmental regulations, gas mileage, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody starting at a company level has to go to their management and say, stop supporting the anti-environment things, legislation through the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I'd love to hear, what is Patagonia doing on that?
But you got to keep it short. I hate to say that because we're going to run out of time.
I read that op-ed also, but to answer your first question, Patagonia does a lot of educating. We do various different ways of educating. It's a very difficult balancing act not to preach to people and bury them in facts and force them to read long treatises about exactly what you're talking about. It's crucially important. We've learned different ways to do it. We make videos, we do ads, our CEO writes LinkedIn pieces. It all depends on what kind of venue we're working with, and we try to do as much of it as we can without becoming pontificators. But it is crucially important, and the more companies that do it, the more it will get out there. People are just now beginning to get it about fast fashion, how very dangerous it is. Chamber of Commerce, yes. It's true, Patagonia is not a member of Chamber of Commerce for this reason, but it's also, I think, again, it may be, I don't know if this is true, but it may be an opportunity. What Patagonia sees a lot of is how to change when you become a partner with someone. Walmart came to us 10, 15 years ago, and at first we were like, oh, Walmart, we're not going to get our hands dirty with Walmart. And in fact, it turned out to be a very good partnership where we started together a special apparel coalition that would reduce impact. So I have become a little less secure in saying, oh, just write them off. It may be true. As I said, we're not members of the Chamber of Commerce for that reason. More people need to know about that particular lobbying group. But at the same time, there might be a moment where you can really talk to people. So that's
Thank you. I mean, there's so much to say to us, and I'm sorry this 45 minutes was a little bit like having a Dixie cup at the Niagara Falls and trying to catch some of what you have to say. Just a few words about all that you had to say. I must say I'm very moved by my jacket, which I discovered as an act of love, because I got it in a bag for $2 of many, many jackets from the place down the hill. I thought it was a sartorial movement, but it turns out it was an act of love. Thank you. Also, in addition, we do have a green bin in our parking lot, which is a fabric recycle bin, and it is often full of people putting things like my jacket's in there. Yeah. Also, I just want to say what a treat it is for us, Lisa, to have you here seated between your mom and dad. Your mom and dad are glowingly proud of you, and they love you beyond words. And periodically, when they have too much Patagonia clothing, your mom shares it with people in the church who she thinks need a warm coat. So it's really great to have you here. What a great boss she must be here. And I also want to say how delighted I am that our conversation again touched on the purpose of a corporation. Brian in the back here, and Kathleen, you're here somewhere, and Steve Roach. Remember when we were having our money conversation, we discussed the purpose of a corporation, and you helped to build that out a little bit. I know that during the coffee hour today, there's so many people that would like to have a word with you after church, and I just want to simply say this is kind of the fullness of the fall is coming to an end, which seems so hard to believe. And next week, we'll have lectionary Bible studies we do during the summer as people come and go to Grandma's house. And then the following week, December 7th and 8th, We're going to have the former presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, Frank Griswold, is going to be here on Saturday to lead a quiet day, and I hope you'll make room in your schedule to spend time with somebody who you know and a man of great depth. And then on Sunday, he's going to be speaking here about the active life and the contemplative life, and then he's going to be the celebrant and the preacher. So that's in 2 weeks. But muchas gracias for such a beautiful time with you this morning, and I wish there was more time. And Vincent, sorry we got you out of bed so early this morning. Anyway, peace and blessing. See you all again soon.